In 3, 2, 1.
Hi, fellas. Welcome to The Greater Good. My name's Tony.
And I'm Joe.
And this is the channel where we come up with creative ideas, thoughts, and share suggestions and advice to help people improve their lives and join in becoming part of the greater good.
Let's dive in.
Hello and welcome to The Greater Good. I am Tony, one of your hosts, here alongside with my twin brother Joe, the co-host. And this is The Greater Good. Last episode we touched base on, just a recap, we touched base on overcoming obstacles, and we did the homework of what is the why, or what is the driving force to get you going to achieve that greater good. The gunshot will go off to start the race, but what's going to be moving you forward? So that was the homework that we touched on. And the first thing I wrote down for this one, and we were discussing before we started the show here, was that this is like the hardest topic to write for. That was like my initial note was that this is probably one of the toughest questions, because basically it's a very subjective question, and it's like, what your why is different for everybody. Your driving force is kind of individualistic in a sense. I mean, there is common driving forces that people get behind, but as far as what touches to your inner core is very subjective. So it's very hard to say, like, here's your why, go for it. So before we kind of like dive into it, Joe, is there anything, like, I know like I said, we were talking off air, and you mentioned that you had a really hard time kind of getting this homework completed. Like, what are some things you want to add to this before we really dive in here?
Yeah, like you said, this is a big topic to tackle, and for me especially, because I, to be honest, didn't really have a really good grasp of my why, and I think that's been one of my biggest issues with trying to implement the things that I want to see in my life, right? And the changes I want to make. It's, if you don't have that driving force, that thing to fall back, that kind of reassurance, it's so easy to just kind of revert and go back to kind of your default habits, so to speak, that you might have acquired, and those habits, like we discussed before, might not be working in your best interest, right? So this was kind of, I've been kind of driving us towards getting to this point for personal reasons. I wanted to explore my own why, and I wanted to kind of document the process for getting there, and what it took me to get there. So yeah, I think we have some interesting things to talk about. I do feel like I'm excited about this topic. It has some really good ideas, and I do think that, like you said, even though this is kind of personal, the why should be very personal. Just like your greater good is personal. There's no blanket kind of utilitarian or Kantianism kind of view for everybody. There's no rule book. You guys have to create your own rules. But we can do our best to kind of distill our processes for what we did to get to this point, and kind of give you the steps that we took, that it might help you if you follow those steps too. So let's get cracking. What do you think, Tony? You want to start it?
Yeah, let's get into it, man. So when I was reflecting on it, and it was funny because I was like, normally I'll just like dive into the homework, but I kept putting it off because I was like, every time I was thinking like, how do I want to approach this? I was kind of like drawing a blank, and I was like, all right, let me just get out the pad, and see what I come up with, and kind of do some meditation and reflect on it. So what I came up with was my best insight was that I wanted you to think about what it was when you were a young child that resonated with you. You know, what were you drawn to? What were you as a young child? What habits did you have? What did you thoroughly enjoy? Because I think that's kind of like the truer place to start is, you know, before you were tainted by other people's opinions in the world and you kind of like put your shell on. Once you remove all that, like where does your inner focus lie? And, you know, I think you got to go back to that first kind of like when you became aware. You know, I think that most scientists agree that from age 0 to age 7, you're pretty much being molded by outside influences. You're forming your thoughts, your habits, your, you know, everything by what you're being told. You're kind of creating those foundations. Then like you kind of become more aware after that. You're really just going on autopilot. And then after age 7, age 8, you really kind of say like, oh, I'm my own person, and you start to like become aware of those actual influences on you and feelings and whatnot, and you know, kind of like tying the whole mind-body connection in there. So it's like, what is that? You know, what is that when you first kind of resonate? Like, what is some of those things that? And I understand that this is not easy for a lot of people to go back that far, and it's really hard to kind of do some introspection and may not be able to discover that. But just, I think once whatever feeling comes to you when you do ask yourself the question of like, how, you know, what were you attracted to when you were younger? What was some of the passions and hobbies and things that you remember being really into as a younger person? I think that can help to lead you there. Does that make sense, Joe, or is that kind of like, am I off in left field?
I mean, again, Tony, this is personal to everybody, and I think that the journey is going to be unique, and it should be unique. I do like this kind of renaissance of going back to the age of innocence, so to speak, before you were kind of like told what to do and what to think and where to go, right? However, I do think that there may be an issue with that, because I think that, like you mentioned, from 0 to 7, we are very malleable, right? We're kind of being molded and influenced, and a lot of that influence is coming before we are even conscious of ourselves and who we are and what we want. Like, I'm talking about from birth, being a parent. You know, I think that our actions or the actions of our parents can influence us in ways and can instill a sense of security in the world or a sense of fear. You know, if they're constantly on edge and afraid, infants pick that up. Toddlers kind of receive these messages, whether directly or indirectly. And so, depending on your upbringing, that, you know, you might be coming from a disadvantage. You know, maybe you're fearful. You feel the world is not safe, and so that might be something that you need to deconstruct rather than go back to. Am I mistaken with that?
No, and that's why I kind of prefaced there, where it's like, you know, obviously everybody's upbringing is not the same there. I think when you kind of peel all those things away, and I feel like there is part of you that connects with something. There's you know, that innately is like you're drawn to. And I'll give an example of myself. Like, I remember as a child always wanting to be outside, be outdoors, and you know, and I didn't even know what that meant, and even kind of when I reflected on it, like, what is that? Like, am I supposed to be like a carpenter or something? Like, I like being outdoors and being building things and being with my friends and whatever we were doing. And it was one of the things I was like, well, I always liked coming together as a group and putting our focus on a goal to achieve. Like, I'm sure you remember this as a kid. We decided to build a clubhouse, and we took all the effort, energy all summer long, going back and forth from a construction site that was like probably a 3/4 to a mile away, walking through people's backyards with like 2x4s and big sheets of plywood, whatever nails we could find after the construction crew left, and built a pretty solid foundation and got the ball rolling with the clubhouse. So it was like, that is what I remember really being attracted to, is that whole like sense of collectivity. And there was this like, we're building this thing that is going to be something great that we're all going to enjoy and benefit from. I remember, like, if there was, also as a kid, like if we were going to the movies and someone didn't have enough money for candy or something like that, like, and I had extra money, like I always wanted everybody to be having the same fun, so like, all right, here's an extra, like, pay me back whatever, or don't even pay me back, like, here's an extra $1, like, let's all get candy and let's all have a fun time. So it was like, I feel like, at the heart, is that's kind of my why, my driving force is to bring about that, that join more people in this kind of like social sharing, and let's do it to build up society for the greater good. Let's make those around us, let's come together and let's do things that we know are going to benefit others and that we can all share in.
Yeah, man. Like I I remember those days very fondly too. And it wasn't just the fort. We made zip lines. We made rope swings over the creek. You know, we were outside constantly. And I do think some of that, or maybe a lot of that. I mean, first of all, it has to do with our upbringing. So we were lucky in that situation. I always tell like kind of friends and family that we weren't rich in wealth, like money, but we were rich in family, right? So it's like we had, for the viewers that don't know, Tony and I were twins, obviously, but we also have 4 other siblings. So we're one of 6, right? Or 2 of 6. And our parents are both one of 7. So we had a big extended family, lots of cousins and stuff. But we also were like kind of like the social nexus of the little street that we lived on. So each of us always had like 2 friends over. So, we had like a 2 dozen people house at any one time. But we did spend a lot of it outside, and we were very constructive and creative. And I remember we had vivid imaginations. So I think that has a lot to do with kind of feeling safe, secure, with exploring outdoors, with having kind of like-minded friends. So I guess in retrospect, we're very lucky in that situation, because there's a lot of people that didn't have that stuff. And I think that it's also a sign of the times, because maybe a lot of the messages that children today, and I'm kind of trying to be very self-aware about this as a parent. I'm not always the best at it, but we didn't have devices. We didn't have the internet. Our phones had wires. Our TVs had antennas that you had to kind of wiggle around to get the signal, right? And so the kids nowadays don't have that, and they might be from very early age seeing that devices on phones and looking there, and that's social interaction. That's what they're learning now. And so maybe that's why we're kind of feeling this sense that we need to kind of go back and gain that again, right? Do you think that resonates at all?
Yeah, because I think our generation is one of the last generations to be able to experience that, and I always felt like an outsider growing up, and I'm sure you felt like this too. Like everyone was watching different MTV, everyone had cable around us, and we're watching like all the music videos and stuff, and we're like, we have basic channels, like we have 2 through 10 or whatever it was, and we got to like get the right kind of position on the antennas to be able to watch TV. So like, if it was bad weather, you really weren't watching TV.
Yeah.
But yeah, be able to have that face-to-face interaction. We know what that's like as a common practice, instead of just texting or commenting on things. And I don't think that that's horrible. I think that's good and serves a purpose. But I think it's detrimental in the fact that you don't get as much benefit when you're out socially connecting and having those face-to-face internet interactions. And when you see it as a comparison, because you're seeing it through a filtered lens where people are only showing you the happy moments and the good times and stuff, like you knew the struggles of your friends growing up. You had those, like, you embraced each other when there was tough times, and you were there to like give a physical pat on the back, and it's like, that's what's missing. And that's, I think we could still bring that back. We could still push the movement forward with that. And it sure as hell is going to be one of my driving forces going forward, to bring that as much as I can to myself, those around me, and the society at large.
Yeah, man, this is, I think that a lot of people are struggling with this kind of sense of dissatisfaction or disaffection. Like, we are disconnected, a lot of disses, right? Where we have kind of advanced technologically rapidly, right? Over the last couple of decades, a lot of changes have happened that we didn't expect to happen this quickly. And I think that it's having an unintended social, emotional, and psychological effect on a vast majority of people. I think that there are more people today that feel lost and disenfranchised with the world than ever before. So that's why I think that this is a very important topic that we talk about today. What we feel is the why and how we got there, right? I wrote down kind of 3 topics that we can break down, like, what is purpose, why is it important, and how can I develop my purpose, right? I think that you've already touched upon part of it. Going back and kind of finding the core of what makes you tick could work for some people, right? Mm-hmm. So that it could be stripping away all these things that have been kind of put on you, and maybe you've kind of taken and adapted and think are coming from yourself. But if you really kind of reflect and take that time to meditate and to unravel, you realize that you're almost like you're living a lie, and maybe that's why you feel so disconnected, because you're not living your genuine self. You're not being true to yourself. So it could be a hard stop type process like that. I kind of outlined a couple steps. I'm already jumping to how you can develop it, but the good news is that we've already covered about half those steps in our first 2 episodes. So we've got a head start, and we'll get into that. For me, I wrote down, what is purpose, right? For me, purpose is the recognition of your moral responsibility to perpetually work towards the enactment of your greater good, right? So
nice.
you reenact, yeah, you recognize that you have a moral responsibility to work towards what you picture as the greater good. And then I kind of put a side note and away from the obstruction of it. So not only are you working towards it, but you're also working away from its opposite. And this is important, and we'll get into that later. And that the purpose, that's just the first part of purpose. The second part is you combine that with the understanding that although there will be obstacles, you are able, know how to, and will make a difference, right? So basically, purpose is your devotion to seeing the actualization of your greater good. And I think that's why with our pilot episode, it was very important to talk about what is the greater good and why that's important, right? So once you got that picture, that visualization, that destination, now you got to know how to get there. And it's good that we talked about obstacles, because a lot of that, like we mentioned in episode 2, can sideline a lot of people, right? Before they even get started. So knowing where you're going and knowing that there's going to be things getting in your way, that's great. So now that we know that, we can kind of develop our purpose, right? We can find out that we can know now Pandora's box is open, right? You know that there's a greater good. You know that it's not going to be easy to get there, but you have that moral impetus. There you go. Moral impetus to see that through. Now that the kind of cat's out of the box, there's no putting it back again, right? If you don't do anything, then you're actively working towards the obstruction of that greater good, or the opposite. That's why I included that. Okay.
Yeah, great idea.
So yeah, I think that I've been listening to a lot of Jordan Peterson lately. He's a Canadian professor, psychological professor, I think. But he quoted Nietzsche. I thought I wrote it down, but I can't find it. But it's like give the person who the man who knows his why can overcome any how, right? I think that's what Nietzsche said. Nietzsche, right? I wrote it down somewhere, but it wasn't in this journal, right? So basically, you can look at the opposite. What I like to do, what I've been doing a lot lately with this homework assignment, and what I've really enjoyed is taking the opposite of a stance. Because I think that if you look at one path, that's great, but you can, and your brain can kind of revert that you're not on that path. But if you kind of look at the opposite, then you realize that if you're not on that path, then you might as well be, then you're on the opposite path, right? So a man who doesn't know his why can't really overcome anything, right? So it's going to be very difficult to take it anyhow. Okay, so what does all this mean?
Yeah, bring it back.
Yeah. Basically, for me, because I wanted to find my own greater good, I have this image, and you've kind of referenced it, about the greater good being the destination on this road path, and that the obstacles that we talked about last episode are kind of the detours or the speed bumps or the things that get in our way. And therefore, I believe that our purpose could be our driving force. So I drew a picture, and it's really horrible, so bear with me, but it's kind of like a road map, right? Where you kind of start here and you drive up there. Maybe I'll take a picture and put it up on the screen right now. But for me, the greater good is constantly changing, and this is something that we should make our audience aware of. This is not static. Nothing is static. Everything should be dynamic. We change, we evolve, our thoughts change, we move from A to B, and our perspective changes. So it would be asinine to think that once we set our greater good, and once we define our purpose, I avoided saying find, because your purpose isn't lost, it's there. You just need to cultivate it and define it, right? Develop it. But that will change constantly. So already my greater good's changing, and I wanted to distill it and boil it down so that it's easy and it's memorable, and that it's kind of, like I mentioned in the first episode, that you can kind of instantly pull it up with a vision or something. And so I have this picture of the sun here, and I wrote prevailing appreciation of life. So that's my greater good, my PAL, my pal, right? And so I think that if we can move towards, we can bump that thermostat up where more and more people have an appreciation of life and kind of understand that life is beautiful and that we can find meaning in love, awe, respect of life, then that this meaning is valuable. I think that finding meaning alleviates suffering. So I'm going to work therefore my purpose is to first practice living my life with love, appreciation, and a sense of wonderment, so that I can become better equipped to instill that love, appreciation, and wonderment in others, right? So then I wrote the law of PAL. Law is love, appreciation, and wonder, and then PAL is the prevailing appreciation of life, right? So I want to write, like, maybe tattoo those on the back of my hand, law of PAL, so that I can kind of remember. I think
that's
that
awesome.
distilling it down, it makes it easier to remember, right? If you have some convoluted definition, then you might get lost. Like somebody's like, "What's the purpose of life?" And you're like, "Oh, I used to know it," right? But if you can kind of break it down into kind of a few emotions or acronyms, then that can really help. So basically, to recap, I wrote that if suffering comes from feeling like life is meaningless or that we are powerless to make any significant change. And suffering can lead to such emotions as, hate or bitterness or, kind of even cruelty. If suffering leads to destruction, maybe I can combat suffering by sharing meaningful moments and helping others to understand and develop their own meaning or value of life, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. What are your thoughts so far, Tony, on that?
I think you got a book in the making there, man. That's the purpose of life. That's I think that's that could be the title. But yeah, man. Wow. Home run there. That was pretty insightful. Yeah, definitely.
I think that I have a belief that positivity is infectious, and if we act in a positive way, that has a knock-on effect, and other people will take that and they will act more positively, and then that will affect, like maybe by me acting positively and just living my life better, I have positive interactions with 3 people per day. Those 3 people kind of, I rub off on them and they have a positive interaction with another 2 or 3 people, and that kind of that spirals out. And that's the kind of world that I'm hoping to build. So I think that that's our purpose, is to act in accordance with what we want to see the greater good come about, right?
Yeah, yeah. Because on the flip side of that is, negativity is also attractive. What was the term you used?
Infectious.
Infectious.
At the
Yeah.
beginning of
So
the show, yeah, I want to be a contagion for in my last days, as I look over my life, what do I want people to have said about it, right? I want, oh no, this isn't. Basically, I kind of wrote that I want to be a contagion for, oh yeah, I want to be a disease of joy and start a contagion of happiness. I kind of used those terms. I think that it
there
is,
you
and you're
go,
right.
man.
The opposite is also true. If I'm miserable and you're walking around and on cloud 9 and you're really happy, and you bump into me and I snap at you, I can wipe that out of you, and then all of a sudden your mood is filtered, right? And that might also carry on to other people. So you're right.
Yeah, and it's funny. I was talking with someone recently. He was telling me a story about uh, he had a neighbor in the town he used to live in, and he said everybody loved this guy because it was like no matter what he was going through, no matter what you were going through, like every time it was like an ongoing thing with him. But it was like a great thing that he said. Every time you saw him, he would start the conversation going, "Just when I thought my day couldn't get any better, I see you." So it's like you're like, how could you? That's like what you say. You're kind of like putting that infectious positivity out there. Like if you're not having a good day, seeing him and hearing him say that like makes you feel good. So it's like, all right, that's being. He could easily say the opposite and say, like, oh man, I thought my day wouldn't get any worse. Now I gotta see you. Like, even if he's just
Yeah.
joking, you might take it the wrong way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, as funny as it said, like, yes, these feelings, these emotions are infectious and can spread, and you can kind of choose which one you want to spread, but you can also choose which ones you allow to affect you. So even if it's like someone's being negative, you have the willpower within you to say, you know what? I'm not going to be caught in this infectious negative bubble here. I'm going to go somewhere else, and put my attention there. So it's where you want to put your attention, where you want to focus. Like the world could be coming down, but you could be seeing the rainbow above the clouds, or whatever kind of image you want to put to it. And it's really it's one of the things I did when writing out the why is that you have the choice, and you have to recognize that you have the choice, even though you've been kind of shaped from outside influences, whether it be media, whether it be close family and friends, whether it be some type of event that happened to you. Like, you got to recognize that at your core, you have a moment-to-moment choice on how to construct and build that path. And most people, I don't think they feel that they have that. I think they feel like if you treat me bad, I have to have the reaction of negativity. If you do something to me, I have to have that automatic reaction, like, I'm going to get you back. I'm going to go and attack you, or whatever it is. But why? And, I feel like I sometimes feel odd when I do this thing. It's like someone does something to me and I'm like, I don't get, like, maybe I get a little upset, but it's not constantly in my head going, why did that person do that? Man, I'm so pissed off right now. I'm so, like, that's not going to allow me to be any type of creative, and I want to be creative. So it's like being able to recognize that you have that moment-to-moment choice, and just because you were raised a different way, just because you see something on a daily basis, because you've been kind of conditioned, programmed, whatever term you want to use, does not mean you have to act in accordance with that. You have the ability to choose for yourself of where you're going to put your attention, how you're going to construct your feelings. I think if a lot more people got this and understood this and are mindful of this, you'd probably see alleviation of a lot of mental health conditions that are bogging down our planet right now. Replace hatred with compassion.
Some people can look at us and say, "Oh, that's easier said than done." Like, but I think that they can't really lie that this is.
I'm not. Yeah, easier said than done. It takes practice, for sure. It takes practice, just like it took practice for you to recognize and be conditioned to act a certain way. Like, it's going to take a while to break those conditioning. So understand that, but it is possible.
Yeah. That's why I wrote in my purpose. Therefore, it's my purpose is to practice living my life, because I know that it's going to be practice. I know that I'm not there, and something that you mentioned and something that I've included in my steps, which I want to go down through right now before we wrap this up, because I did, like I said at the beginning, want to look at what is purpose. Kind of, we glossed over why it's important, but I think everybody knows that it's important. If you're not living a life of purpose, then I think that you're actively working against your greater good, right? And I think that everybody feels that if they wouldn't be here watching or listening to this without kind of wanting a sense of purpose, right? So, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I forget who said that. I probably should do a better job of writing these things down when I hear them. But it's either you're actively living or you're actively dying. So it's like, without having a sense of purpose, you're actively dying.
Good. Yeah, and that fits perfectly within the last part, which was, how can I develop my purpose? Because I think people come here and they might get inspired by hearing us talk, and by seeing, like, I'm beaming about that story about your friend and the guy. Oh, you just made my life better. Or just before just when I thought that my day couldn't get any better, I'm going to use that. That's awesome. I love that. But
Right?
yeah,
I'm going to start using that too.
let's give them some actionable steps that they can take to help maybe start to figure out what their own purpose is, so they can start living a life of meaning and happiness, right? And spreading that infection, that contagion. Okay. So here's what I wrote down, and you can chime in maybe after I go through it, but I have 5 steps. Okay. And like I said at the beginning, don't worry, because we kind of got you halfway there already with our first 2 episodes. So step 1 of don't say finding, of developing your purpose. Let's do that. Step 1 of developing your purpose: define your greater good. There you go. We've done that already, right? It's important, defining your purpose. You need to understand what your ideal world is and what you're going towards. Step 2, and I think this is kind of new, but we've mentioned it a lot, and just with the quote, we're gonna have to figure out if you're not living, you're dying. But step 2 is to detail what the opposite of your greater good would be. Okay. And I want you to get as graphic or as detailed or as visual, like drawing a picture. Down here on the bottom, I wrote all the bad things that would happen if I didn't drive up here, right? Because now that I know what the greater good is, anything that's not moving towards this way is moving that way. You can't stand still. Time's not waiting. So if you're not actively working towards your greater good, you're actively working towards the destruction of your greater good. So you need to know what that means, right? So step 2 is to detail what would happen. So for example, I wrote, my greater good is the prevailing appreciation of life, all life everywhere, right? So I want people to appreciate life, because I think if you appreciate life, you'll treat other people with respect, kindness, patience, understanding, all that good stuff. So therefore, the opposite is that people think that life is suffering and therefore it's not worth living. Life is meh, or life is suffering, so therefore I'm hateful, I'm bitter, I'm cruel, I'm destructive, and I treat other people that way too, right? That's the opposite of my greater good, the world that I want to move away from. And this is important. So step 1, define your greater good. Step 2, detail what the opposite is. Get as detailed as possible if you can. Be visual, draw a picture. Step 3, again, we've done this step already. Step 3 is accept that there will be obstacles, but don't get overwhelmed. Write down the list of obstacles that you think you might see. On my vision, I have all these roads kind of going off, little dead ends and stuff like that, little speed bumps in the middle, and I've kind of written like obstacles. For example, drugs and alcohol, destructive habits can drive me away from my greater good, or I can get lost to toxic people, violence. I could get lost for a desire for money or fame. That could be a dead end for me, right? So these are all these obstacles that can get in the way. So that's step 3. Don't get overwhelmed, but allow for the fact that you're not perfect, right? There are going to be obstacles. You're not perfect. Step 4, understand and embrace that if you are not making incremental steps towards step 1, your greater good, you are now consciously contributing to the outcome detailed in step 2. Okay? So you know what your greater good is. You know what the opposite of the greater good is. You know that it's not going to be easy. And now that you know all these things, you have to understand and accept that if you're not working towards your greater good, then you're working towards the other way.
You're consciously working against it, yep.
Yeah, you're conscious. It's like I said before, Pandora's box is open. So step 5, now you make your mission statement. It doesn't have to be perfect. If you are doing these steps in order, you should have a good sense of what triggers you, what you're motivated, what you want to work towards, what you want to stay away from, what you're driven away from, and what you're driven towards. So you should be able to figure out your purpose. If you're in doubt, I give a little template that you can use. The template is, I will blah, 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 so that I can blah, blah, blah. And you can fill in the blanks, all right?
Yeah. For example, I'll have to put that in the show notes.
Yeah, we'll put that down there. I will go and work at a nursing home so that I can have a greater appreciation of life, make a more meaningful contribution, and maybe make a difference in somebody else's life. Whatever, that's just an example. But I think that if you're having trouble finding how to word your purpose, you can feel free to use that. Those are my 5 steps. I think that it can work. I did throw in a bonus step if you want to hear it. I think you'll like this one.
So, fire it out, man.
The bonus step is to create a purpose progress journal or purpose tracking journal. Okay? I mean, we keep track of our finances, right? I'm not that great, but when I do keep track, we keep track to make sure that we're making money and we're staying out of debt. And we want to know where we're at. So we should keep track of our progress with our purpose so that we can see and understand, value, or appreciate that we are making purpose and that we're staying out of debt, so to speak, with ourselves and our goals. Or we might see that we're actually sliding towards the step 2 outcome and we can make adjustments, right? I think that I wrote these closing statements, we're not perfect, but we are making a difference, and our efforts will start to have a compounding effect. It will start to, like a domino. Once you see that I think that because some of the things that I was worried about, and I think that you mentioned off air when we were talking about our purpose, was sometimes people get started, they get that momentum, and then something happens, and they forget their why, or they lose that drive, right? And some of the things I was worried about was like, what about money, or what about diversion, relaxation, or what's the difference between going above and beyond versus overextending yourself? This all, or you'll always have to be all on, stuff like that. So these are things I was worried about maybe conflicting with purpose. But I think by tracking it, you'll be more aware that you are making progress. I think that that's what deflates people. Sometimes they're working, and then they don't think that they're getting anywhere. But if they look back and they see how much progress they made, then that could renew their efforts. So if we accept that, small steps will lead us to our ultimate goal. I think that the all or nothing attitude will implode. It will lead to nothing. In fact, it might even have a negative effect, because now if you try to start again, you have a lot more resistance in your mind because, I did that already and it doesn't work, right? So you're actually kind of causing more harm than good. But if we do, like today, I'm going to do one thing towards my purpose, one thing towards my greater good, then you might notice after practicing that, like you said, practicing active listening or practicing whatever, then next month I'll be able to do 2 things or 3 things. I might even go start to enjoy it, and it will become more natural, and pretty much I'm living the majority of my moments that way, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So those are my steps with the bonus step.
With the bonus step, yeah. I mean, yeah, the bonus step is the power step there. There's no really. I mean, you can make progress, but it's always better to track the progress. And you were able to stay more on focus and on task when you were tracking whatever it is. You know, any habit that you want to create in your life, it's always better. And you don't just like say, hey, today's day 1, and, you know, by day 60, this is my goal, and I'm just going to go and, you know, stick with it every day. Yeah, you get there, but it's so much easier and so much better when you track, like, you know, even if it's just writing a couple sentences down at the end of each day or the beginning of each day or whatever, to stay on focus and to stay going. I know personally for myself, it's like one of the highlights of my day now is pulling out my journal and reflecting on what happened that day. I used to never like writing, but you know, it's become one of my better passions there. So yeah, there you have it, folks. Joe, what is the homework done? Where do we go?
Yeah,
What's the next step?
Well, so far in this episode, we talked about kind of why purpose is important, what we feel our own purposes are, and we gave you kind of some meaningful steps or tips or advice that we think might help you in finding your purpose, kind of going back to innocence, unraveling or deconstructing yourself to figure out what really makes you tick. You know, realize that you are in control. I think a powerful thing that you mentioned there, Tony, was a lot of people operate from a reactive standpoint, and they're just constantly reacting. So we can kind of gain control back when we kind of realize that we don't need to react, that we are in control and we can choose how we want to live our lives. And having a strong sense of purpose will lead us there. The steps that we just outlined, defining a greater good, looking at its opposite, acknowledging the obstacles, and then realizing and accepting that if you're not working towards one, you're working towards the other. So writing out your mission statement and journaling. I think that a big part of journaling that should go side and side, and this is something I want to start to implement in my life, and I'm sure that you already are, but I guess this can be a homework assignment for us, is practicing gratitude. There's an interesting video I'll send you later about gratitude that I just saw, and I think that we can maybe we can dive a little bit further into the kind of importance of journaling and of gratitude, right? For our next week, write down why, and basically maybe kind of give some people some advice about, you know, our tips or our strategies for journaling and what we use and how we do it. And we can kind of come up with a challenge for our viewers out there so that they can join the bandwagon too. Okay?
There you go. Boom. All right, folks. This has been another exciting, excellent episode of The Greater Good. So until next time, friends, same black hair, same two twins. Thank you for coming. Your host for the evening, Tony and Joe. Love you, brother. Good night.
Love you, man.